Hey, it's a Tuesday, so you know what time it is. It's time for Stephen Lassen, Senior Editor, Athlon Sports. Welcome back to the show, my friend. How's it going?
Hey, Mike. It's going great. It's great to talk to you as always. I am eagerly counting down the days and the hours until we get to Saturday so we can get bowl season underway. A little sad. We only had one college football game on Saturday, so jonesing for some college football at this point.
Yeah, I hear. I'm heavily on the YouTube right now, just watching back games from this season, trying to figure out who these teams are that the SEC's playing. So it's like you said, it's tough out there for us college football maniacs. You know what?
It is. I guess the good news is the transfer portal is, while it is kind of wild and crazy and it can be chaotic, I guess it's keeping things interesting for those of us college football fans. And the coaching carousel is slowed down. I would imagine the coordinator carousel picks up here, especially with early signing day right around the corner. So really no off season, but there's at least some news out there until we get to Saturday. We get to bowl season starting.
Yeah. Oh, there is a lot of news, Stephen. So we'll get into it here in just a second. But before we get to that, hey, it is an unfortunate anniversary today, Stephen. It's 1 year since the tragic passing of Mike Leach. And just wanted to hear your thoughts on, the impact he made on the game, favorite memories, just anything. Whenever somebody mentions the Pirate to Stephen Lassen, what do you think of? What is it? His press conferences where he's talking about mascots and fighting to the death. Is it a big game? Is it all these high flying offenses? What is it that stands out to you about Mike Leach?
I remember when Mike Leach was hired at Texas Tech, and I remember reading about his hire in the USA Today newspaper. I guess that, maybe I'm not sure what that says about me as a nerd reading a newspaper back like when I was like in middle school or whatever. But I remember reading about his personality and his offenses. And when we got to see him at Texas Tech, I think one of the first memories I had of him was in a bowl game. They played Iowa. And his halftime interview was pretty memorable. I think they asked him how they were playing or how they were going to attack, and he was like, "We're not playing worth a bleep," and ran off the field. And I'm sort of paraphrasing.
Heated up in game. They missed the field goal, and they go in at halftime leading by only 7. So momentum in this ball game definitely has to be going back to the guys in Lubbock. Adrian Karsten, let's go to you.
Coach, do you feel like the momentum is coming back to your side of the field now?
I don't know. We're not playing worth a damn, and we need to play better than we are right now.
Ron?
Well, very succinctly put. Adrian, I don't think we can add much to that, do you?
It gave you an early glimpse of his personality, and it's not only the personality, it's the legacy to me that he left behind for college football. When you think about the greatest offensive minds in the sport, Mike Leach is up there. He's one of the innovators. You see this offense in staples of high school football, up to college, and the concepts up to the pros now. He's just truly one of the offensive innovators. And whether it was his personality, the legacy, the moments that you mentioned, being asked about mascots, Halloween candy. I remember the time at Texas Tech too, where there was a kicker who won a halftime contest, and he brought him onto the team. It ended up being a pretty effective kicker for him. So he was just one of a kind, and sorely missed by those of us college football fans. Because he actually, the conference realignment, I think he would have been perfect to have some thoughts about what's going on in the Pac-12.
Yeah, he could have been the ideal college football commissioner we sorely need. He would have come up with some wacky stuff. You know what?
Absolutely, he would have been perfect for that, or perfect for the college game day in the future. Although maybe he would have went way too over the segment time, and they would. Oh man, whether it was on the field or off the field, you just start to think about the impact that he had. The on-field play, the coaches that learned under him, the system, the players, and how extensive his coaching tree and legacy is going to be. So, like I said, he is sorely, I think, missed by college football. Just the overall personality, what he gave to the game and stuff, and just what a legacy he left behind at Mississippi State or just throughout his career.
Yeah, I mean, I knew he was beloved all around the game, but when he passed, just the tributes and the stories, it kind of blew my mind. It was even a wider net than even I realized at the time. So just want to give a little moment there for the Pirate because he is sorely missed. But hey, Stephen, we have to move on. A tough transition from that, but right before we hopped on, again, this is just speculation and rumors and all that, but this is the perfect time for all that, Stephen, because you referenced it. The early signing period is coming up quickly, a little over a week. I believe it's December 20th. 20th, yeah, is when the early signing period will begin. And it's a national signing period is what it is. You know, where the Power 5 and specifically SEC, they'll sign the majority of their high school class during this time. And we've got the rumor mill is running rampant here, Stephen, because Dylan Raiola, top quarterback, 5-star, Georgia commit. He's been committed throughout the fall, I believe through the entire summer. I think they even uprooted and moved their family to Georgia to be closer to Athens. He's been up, I think he's been to every game that he can visit. I mean, I thought he was locked in. I thought he was a dog for life, Stephen. He hadn't even stepped on campus as an official signee. But so much speculation that he is going to flip to Nebraska, and this is like Steve Wiltfong, I mean, credible people, Chad Simmons, all these people saying, hey, watch this flip. His father played at Nebraska. He's a Nebraska legacy. His uncle, I believe, is a current staff member there. So
he's the offensive line coach.
I mean, again, this has not even happened yet, Stephen, but if it does, I mean, what would that mean for the state of Georgia here that, they were probably a game away from being a three-peat champion, something that is really not really done in modern. It hasn't been done in modern college football, and we still don't know Carson Beck. Like, what's up with that? He certainly could come back, but he could. It's gone long enough, Stephen, where I think he is, definitely considering NFL. If he leaves and we don't get Dylan Raiola, I know we got Gunnar Stockton. So it's not like the cupboard's completely bare here, but Brock Vandegrift's already committed to Kentucky. We are, and you said it yourself, Stephen, early look at the Athlon magazine. I mean, Georgia's going to be, I'll let you say, but I think you said top 3 in the country. How would this affect the Bulldogs going into next season?
Yeah, it's pretty significant. The first thing that comes to my mind is sort of the dominoes that could happen here. Like, let's just say he does commit to Nebraska. Maybe it's also no coincidence that Matt Rule, the head coach of Nebraska, a couple days ago was like, hey, we need about $1.5 million, $2 million for a quarterback. And then this news comes out. Are they connected? I don't know. It's just a fun coincidence probably in all this. But you think about the dominoes. You think about if you're Georgia, you kind of have your next guy lined up. So if you assume Carson Beck comes back, Raiola's ready in 2025 to be the guy. Then all of a sudden, if Beck goes to the NFL, you're left with Gunnar Stockton. Does Georgia go into the portal? Does Georgia get into the sweepstakes for a quarterback like Cam Ward, who's going to visit, I guess, Miami? Ohio State's been rumored for him. It's the domino effect that intrigues me is what does Georgia do if they lose him? Do they go out and they get a transfer? Do they go out and get one other freshman quarterback and start offering some guys? So you have that domino effect, but then it becomes 100% clear that they probably have to find a way to keep Carson Beck. Like whatever it requires, an NIL, whatever it is, I think you have to keep him. Even if you have confidence in Gunnar Stockton, I think Carson Beck, I think he's second, third, whatever you want to rank him, best quarterback in the SEC this year, would be one of the top quarterbacks in college football next year if he comes back. So it's important for Georgia to keep him regardless of what happens outside of the Raiola kind of recruitment. So a lot of interesting dominoes could be in play here. I think Georgia's a top 5 team for next year for sure. If Carson Beck comes back, I think they could easily be preseason number 1 contender with Alabama.
Yeah, and fair or not, Stephen, I mean, it doesn't necessarily indicate what the future will hold for Georgia, but they have not had a ton of success with transfer quarterbacks. Well, unless you count Stetson, and I really don't because he went to he started there and he went to junior college and came back. I'm thinking JT Daniels, Jamie Newman, and of course, Justin Fields leaving the program. I guess he doesn't count either. But hey, I'm just saying, hey, go into the portal. That would be their only option, I think, because I'm a big believer in Gunnar Stockton. I should say that. But again, it's championship or bust now in Athens, and we don't know what we have in Gunnar Stockton. As much as I like to believe he's going to be a great prospect, can he win you a national title year one? Because that's what they're going to demand of him. And I would, to your point, I think they would be the number one spot for a transfer quarterback. So I don't know. That's just a situation we have to monitor.
Yeah, and you start thinking about the transfer quarterback market, the names that are entering the portal now, it's kind of slowed a little bit. The big names got in last week. It doesn't mean that someone couldn't jump in as a surprise in the next few days here. But Dylan Gabriel committed to Oregon. And we talked about Cam Ward. You've got Riley Leonard. You've got a few other, Will Howard from Kansas State still out there. So there are some, but you're also getting past that first tier of options where it's more solid second tier guys. Let's also, if you want to speculate a little bit too, like what if Carson Beck does go to the NFL and Georgia starts the season against Clemson in the opener and they get Alabama early in the season, if that schedule leak is accurate? Like, you'd be talking about a quarterback being dropped into one of the most like difficult starts to the season. Georgia's got talent. They're going to be fine. I think it's kind of the collective like intrigue here. Like, what does it mean for transfers? What does it mean for freshmen? What does it mean for all the dominoes that could be in play here for Georgia? So there's a ton of intrigue here, hinging on Raiola and also hinging on Carson Beck in Georgia next year.
KJ Jefferson, come on, Dan. That would be, I know he's not even in the portal, but that would be my pitch to him. But hey, it's interesting you mentioned that, Stephen. I did want to ask you real quick about this Georgia schedule leak. I'm going to throw it up on the screen. I'm going to run down the schedule here if you're just listening to the podcast. But like you said, in the opener in Atlanta, they get Clemson, which, they've been a little bit down, but still that's elite competition. And every time Georgia takes the field from here on out under Kirby, they're going to have a target on their back. This will be an opportunity, regardless of what anybody thinks of Clemson next season. They're going to have talent. And if you beat a team like Georgia, all of a sudden you skyrocket into the top 5, maybe even higher. So that's going to be a primetime game. And like you said, that you may not even have your starting quarterback back for the Georgia Bulldogs. Second week of the season, Tennessee Tech. That's the Georgia non-conference schedule we know and love. Third week at Kentucky. Never an easy game for Georgia. You get 2 weeks to prepare for at Alabama, maybe the defending national champion. They will be obviously the defending SEC champion. Auburn at home, Mississippi State at home, at Texas. My goodness, Stephen, is this a playoff schedule or is this a SEC regular season? It is regular season here.
I was gonna say it's like the ninth division of the NFL, right? SEC.
2 weeks to prepare, as always, for Florida in Jacksonville, at Ole Miss. Again, we're going to get to them. They could be red hot. Tennessee at home, UMass at home, Georgia Tech at home. My goodness, Stephen, there is they go from what is perceived to be the easiest slate in the country last offseason to what may be regarded as the toughest schedule in the country. Thoughts on Georgia playing that gauntlet? And given the fact that we'll be in a 12-team playoff format, the good news is you could drop one of those, maybe even two, and still be fine for the playoff. But it's not going to be a guarantee by any means.
Man, it's like a complete reversal from this year. Even though, and shame on me for thinking this, I thought Georgia was the best team in the country before that SEC championship game. And that was regardless of schedule. Sometimes when you look at teams and you're evaluating them on their schedule, if they're just taking care of business, like to me, it's not about how easy your schedule is. If you're going out and dominating, that says a lot about you. But in this case, we'll learn a lot about how good Georgia is right away next year. Like you said, the Clemson game, I've got, just off the top of my head, Ole Miss, Texas, and Alabama. That could be 3 top 10 opponents they have to play on the road next year. That doesn't even count the rivalry game against Florida. It doesn't even count a potential SEC championship game rematched against an Alabama, Texas, or Oklahoma, potentially. This is a schedule where if you're Georgia, obviously it's a new era of football with the 12-team playoff, but I think you can afford 2 losses on this schedule and still feel comfortable about getting in. This is the other angle of the 12-team playoff, where if you're Georgia, let's say you do go 10-2 and you're seeded 6th or 7th. Is anybody in the playoff going to want to play that Georgia team potentially with Carson Beck, even if they do go 10-2? That's sort of the flip side of this is I think you will see some of these teams like an Alabama, like a Georgia, if they're 11-1, 10-2, and they're seeded in the middle of the playoff, they're probably going to be a very trendy pick to go very far. So I guess all that to be said, this year's schedule was pretty easy. Next year's schedule, if Georgia goes undefeated, they would have earned it because that is very difficult.
Yeah, and I would love to see, again, Georgia fans are hoping for 12-0. I get it, but I would love to see a 10-2 Georgia get into the field, like you said, maybe a 6 seed, and undefeated Florida State. Just leave them out. They're basically UCF to me. You know what?
Hey, if the committee thought that Florida State fans were bad and they had to remove the email address on the website to prevent complaints, can you imagine leaving Georgia out at 10-2 with this schedule next year? Can you imagine it
ain't gonna happen, Stephen. No chance that happens.
Right. There should be no chance, but if they do, I feel very confident in Georgia fans letting the playoff committee members know very loudly about their complaints.
Now, all anybody wants to talk about right now, Stephen, is the portal and all going in with that. So I wanted to ask you real quick, is there any teams that are particularly stood out to you with we're now a little bit over the portal window being open? It's a 30-day window, so we got a lot more to go. But where things stand after the first week, Stephen, are there any SEC teams that are particularly hurt by the losses via the portal in your mind?
I think the first one that comes to mind is Florida. You take away Trevor Etienne, a guy that would have been probably one of the SEC's top running backs, playmakers next season, and potentially he could go to a rival or another SEC team. That's problematic for Florida on a lot of levels. Also, Princely, one of your best defensive players, also hitting the portal. So in a year where Billy Napier, there's a lot of urgency to get this fixed. 2 of your top players are exiting the program. They could backfill, certainly, but certainly I don't think it's a good look, and it's also a loss on the field. I think the losses for A&M long-term, I think, and probably they're going to be fine, I think. But when you lose some guys like Walter Nolan, Fadil Diggs, Micah Overton, LT Overton, you also throw Besantis, the tackle transferring too. They lost a lot of talent in the portal. I was a little surprised to see all those guys leaving the program after Mike Elko came back to College Station. I don't think it's a huge concern, but I do think there's a lot of losses in there for a Texas A&M team that I think has potential to be in the top 25 at the start of next year.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you about Florida, Stephen, because I'm hearing a lot of, obviously, I mean, a lot of people are, and we're going to talk to a Florida insider on the next episode, but the fact that they are losing some key contributors, now they're getting Graham Mertz back, but, I thought he was significantly better than I thought he would be, and they still were not that good. So, again, I'm not discounting him by any means, but I'm just wondering how much of an impact he makes unless he continues to make massive strides or something. But you hit it there, ETN. I mean, he didn't get the ball nearly that as much as many thought he should. He was one of the more explosive playmakers at the running back position in the entire SEC. But it's a unique position, Stephen, because even the biggest Billy Napier defenders, they're saying, we're not going to have a lot of seniority on this team. It's going to be a lot of young players once again. And again, the schedule reveal will be out Wednesday, so we know the teams. We just don't know the order for the Florida Gators. But this is a gauntlet. 11 Power 5 teams on the schedule, and having to make strides in year 3. Fans are demanding progress, and I'm not saying there won't be, but it just makes it that much more difficult losing some of your big time players, doesn't it?
It really does. And I don't know if this is fair or not. So feel free to just tell me I'm an idiot by saying this, but it's like the perception, like your perception among the college football, like collective and also like recruits. And you've seen Florida's lost some recruits. They've also watched ETN. They've lost one of their best defensive players leave the program. You've now seen Florida finish with 2 losing seasons in a row under Billy Napier. The positive side is, I do think if you watching this Florida team, I trust Billy Napier. Like, they could go out and find some running backs and bring them in, and I think they would do fine. The fact that Graham Mertz was that much better than we thought and significantly improved from Wisconsin ought to be like a positive sign for Billy Napier. If he can do that with the offense, and realistically, maybe there's some growth there in 2024 combined with young players on defense and portal additions stepping up on that side of the ball, you can see a path to improvement here. But you and I during the season, we've talked about like proof of concept and trying to sell things and positive momentum. But at some point, like, that runs out and you have to start showing results. And Florida State just missed the playoff. Miami sort of kind of hovering around 500 right now under Mario Cristobal. If Florida State keeps trending up and Florida's still hovering around 6-6, I mean, it gets a little harder, I think, to sell your program in the state. Now, they are top 5 in recruiting this year too, so we should, keep in mind they have a really good class coming to Gainesville. So I think it really hurts the perception and sort of continues to add to that. There's this uncertainty maybe about how this is all going to work out. There's been some good signs, and there's been some positive signs, but it always feels like there's one step forward and one step back. It doesn't really feel like there's been that leap. Like, had they won at Missouri, had they beat Florida State at the end of the year, you'd go into the offseason feeling a lot better. Does that seem fair?
Yeah, but I was going to ask you this, Stephen. What about, because I've heard this comparison, is Missouri, they never had a winning season under Drink until this year. Is that it's not an apples to apples comparison, but would that be your kind of what you're clinging to if you're a Florida fan, that, hey, maybe stability? Mark Stoops, is another one, although it may be offensive to Florida fans to say, look at Stoops at Kentucky, you know what I mean? But, yeah. but Drink is probably a better example. Could you see that path to where it's a breakout is just around the horizon?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's, if you're a Florida fan, I think you wanted to buy into some optimism and maybe like the turnarounds. Like, even I hate to use Florida State as an example for Florida fans, but Mike Norvell went 5-7 the year before they won 10 games last year. So there is sort of a, you have to like almost like lose close, and then you start to win some of those games. And then you start to kind of take to the next step as a program. I think if you wanted to kind of play another angle of optimism for Florida, when you look at their schedule, it is difficult. Miami goes into next year. We'll see where they are with the quarterback situation. They probably will be picked top 40 somewhere. A&M's got a new staff. We'll see what the roster looks like later this year. They get Ole Miss at home, and they get LSU at home. So in some regards, the schedule is difficult, but some of those games come at your place, and you're also catching some of these teams in transition. So there may be some silver lining there if you're Florida, that while this is difficult, there are probably some ways you can kind of navigate this if you get some growth along the defense and continue to improve offensively.
Mm-hmm. Now, how about, let's not be so negative, Stephen. How about teams that have helped themselves in the portal? And again, it's early. We're just over a week, so there's many more commitments on the horizon. But does anyone stand out to you And I was specifically also wanting to get your thoughts on Mississippi State landed Blake Shapen from the quarterback from Baylor. Arkansas just landed quarterback Talon Green from Boise. And Mizzou, they've landed a running back, Marcus Carroll, and a defensive back from Clemson. Can you tell us anything about any of those players?
Yeah, I should apologize because I should have probably mentioned Vanderbilt and the team that lost a lot to the portal. So my mistake on
We've
that
almost
one.
omitted them from the show because they seem to have no commitment to playing football.
Have they been relegated for Florida State? Is that what's going to No, in all seriousness, my fault on that one. I should have mentioned Vanderbilt. They've lost, of course, you guys have talked about it. You and Shane with Ken Seals and AJ Swan and the receivers. On the positive side, though, you and I talked last week about the job that Eli Drinkowitz has done with transfers and that staff. I love the two that they brought in so far. Carroll, the running back for Georgia State, was sort of a part-time shared carry guy. And then this year he became the go-to guy and ran for over 1,000 yards. You're losing Cody Schrader. You're losing Nathaniel Pete. Here's a guy who's got high experience for a couple years at Georgia State. I also thought if you watch that LSU game, he ran well. He ran hard in that game, and they were just overmatched. So I like the pickup of Carroll at running back. Pride at corner also too. I mean, high-level talent that you can bring in, and we've seen the job that Blake Baker and that defensive staff have done. So I really like what Missouri has done. They've got some holes to fill up front. Still need to see some defensive linemen come in, but I like what they've done there. I also like what Arkansas has done as far as additions so far, especially at the quarterback position, not knowing what's going to happen with KJ Jefferson. Talon Green from Boise State, really intriguing skill set to me. I think he's a bit raw as a passer, but I do think if you watch what Bobby Petrino did with Jalen Henderson at Texas A&M, you can see some things that could work with Talon Green, his mobility, and the strong arm that he has to push the ball downfield. So I like what Arkansas has done at quarterback to add some insurance for next season. Blake Shapen of Mississippi State's really interesting because if you go back to 2021, he started the Big 12 championship game. And it was kind of a breakout performance because Baylor was an underdog against Oklahoma State. And you may remember it was the play at the goal line where Oklahoma State tried to score in the last play and Baylor stopped him. That was the one that he started. And he's got an interesting background. He's a baseball player, and you can kind of see in the arm angles and sort of the way that he moves around. He's talented, but he's been up and down at Baylor. And some of that has been youth at receiver. The offensive line for Baylor has had some ups and downs. I don't know that necessarily the scheme and personnel meshed. They're going to be changing offensive coordinators for next year. So if nothing else, he's a good insurance policy. I think the Mississippi State ceiling at quarterback has been raised. If you had to go into next year with what you had left over from this year, I think you would have been in probably worse shape. This gives you a higher ceiling and can help you get the start to bring in some young guys, allow them some time to develop. So I like the addition of Blake Shapen for Jeff Lebby. He also saw him play in the Big 12 when he was, of course, the offensive coordinator at Oklahoma. So I sort of just trust his evaluation here. Can
you recall off the top of your head, and if you can, it's fine, but was Shapen the quarterback for Baylor when they played Ole Miss in the Sugar Bowl and they ended up beating Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss?
It's a good question. I think it was Jerry Bohannon in that game.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So he would have come back by then.
Yeah, so Bohannon played in that game, and then Shapen, I was trying to look this up. Yeah, he did not play in that Sugar Bowl because in that Big 12 championship game, he threw for 3 touchdowns, and that was kind of the thought process was Bohannon and Shapen went into the offseason, kind of they were going to be neck and neck, but Shapen's performance at the end of the year sort of unseated him, and that's why he became the starting quarterback there.
Well, either way, he's beating Lane. I don't care if he didn't play. That's a win for Mississippi State fans. You know what?
Right. Already starting the Egg Bowl rivalry early. We've got Lebby and we got Kiffin, subtweeting Jeff Lebby a little bit. So I love it, man. 365 days a year.
Well, another Lane Kiffin tweet victim is Texas A&M, of course, Stephen. So I wanted to get your thoughts. Big hire for new head coach Mike Elko. He's hired offensive coordinator Colin Klein from Kansas State. Anytime you can get a alum from the school to leave, Colin Klein, I'm sure he's getting compensated well, but that's a big get. They've been very successful at Kansas State. They played Missouri the last 2 seasons, beat them 2 years ago, went neck and neck at Missouri this year. Came down, of course, to that the longest field goal in SEC history, but that's what it took to beat Kansas State. Thoughts on Colin Klein being hired at A&M, and what do you envision that fit there in College Station?
Big time hire. I thought Colin Klein is a rising star in the coordinator ranks for the last couple of years. He's not that far removed from being a player. If you go back a few years when he played at Kansas State, they did a Heisman kind of publicity for him where they sent out like a Band-Aid container because he was always playing he had over 200 carries as a quarterback, and he was banged up, and he was a runner, and he was he's kind of a dual threat guy, but he was always kind of bloody and beat up. And I think that's the kind of guy when you and I have talked about A&M, it's not about the talk anymore. They did that with Jimbo and the award and all that. Mike Elko is about the work. And I think that's what Colin Klein is. You go back to his career as a player and as a coordinator, not much of a guy that's going to get in front of the media and talk about the hyping up the offense. He's just going to do the work. And when you've watched K-State over the last couple years, the word that comes to my mind is sort of like physicality, and they're also adaptable. Their offensive line has been one of the better groups in the Big 12, kind of smash mouth group. They can run the ball, or they can run it with the quarterback. And they've also had some, depending on who the quarterback is, they can sort of mold the talent around him. So I think they've been very adaptable. And I think that style of offense, I think, will work very well at Texas A&M. If I'm an A&M fan, I'd be very excited. They were second in the Big 12 in scoring offense this year. But if you put on the tape and watch them, I think you'll fall for what they want to do schematically.
Right. Yeah, I got a lot of homework to do, Stephen, studying these coordinators and these quarterbacks, and there's just so much going on. So I'm waiting till things slow down a little bit here. But one thing that I have seen a lot from Colin Klein is him running the quarterback, like you alluded to there. But the key word there that I love to hear with any of these scheme coaches is adaptability. I would have to think that the timeline, and pardon me if I have this wrong, but I would think Deuce Vaughn fit into that timeline, and he was elite. Obviously, now he's in the NFL. But the reason I bring that up, and I'm sure part of Colin Klein's thought process was looking at what A&M had, all that talent, and having Connor Wigman, who he can run. I'm not saying he's a statue back there, but just based on what I've seen from Kansas State quarterbacks, I would say those Kansas State quarterbacks far more mobile than Connor Wigman. But I would probably say, and in fact, I know that Connor Wigman's probably a much bigger arm talent than anything he had to work with at Kansas State. So the ability to adapt to what he has will be paramount in College Station. But quick thoughts on, and we haven't even seen it. So, but thoughts on Colin Klein utilizing Connor Wigman. I have to believe that that's going to be a unique marriage that is probably going to really help Connor Wigman.
100%. The first thing that came to my mind when I saw the Colin Klein hire was to figure out how it would work with Connor Wigman, because his potential the last 2 years, if A&M can harness that potential, they are going to be so much better next year under that staff. And that's what has me so intrigued, is to see the development of Wigman next season under Colin Klein. Was looking back at Colin Klein's stats, and he had over 300 carries, 317 as a quarterback. He ran for 27 touchdowns one year when he was the starting quarterback at K-State. But you look at this season, Will Howard was the K-State starting quarterback, and he had 81 carries. So he was banged up a little bit. They used another quarterback as sort of a change of pace guy. I think that's kind of like you want that sweet spot, maybe a little bit of mobility, 50 to 80 carries a year, but it's going to be up to Colin Klein to take this offense to the next level as far as developing Wigman and also not overusing him because you're going to need him in some of these big time matchups. Obviously the injury this year. So I don't think that they'll turn him into a runner. I think they can sort of situationally use him. And I think that's Colin Klein's adaptability, I think, will play well here.
Mm-hmm. Now, how about Mississippi State, Stephen? This caught me by surprise. They've already hired Jeff Lebby, of course, who's not been a head coach, and he's only been a primary play caller for a couple of years because he's worked under Kiffin, he's worked under Heupel, and I'm sure you couldn't work for two better offensive minds than throw in Sarkisian, maybe top 3 in all the college football, but. Those guys like to call their plays, so, we'll never get the full story on how much Jeff Lebby even called plays under those guys, but now he's a head coach. He's going to call plays at Mississippi State, which is interesting, and now he's hired defensive coordinator Coleman Hutzler away from Alabama, who he's a special teams whiz. He's been at Ole Miss, so he's I'm sure they have a great relationship, but the point I'm trying to make here, Stephen, is, a lot of first times here. To my knowledge, Coleman Hutzler's never called defensive plays, not at major college level. Jeff Lebby's never obviously been a head coach, major college level. A lot of risk, but maybe a lot of reward here for Mississippi State. What's your thoughts on this staff that Lebby's putting together?
Yeah, I think Hutzler was a little surprising because he hasn't been a primary play caller at one stop for like an extended period of time. He may end up being like a home run hire for Lebby. But I always think if you're a first-time head coach, can you get some experience on your staff, especially someone on the defensive side of the ball where you're not going to be as involved? Like almost you're just hiring a head coach of the defense. I think on the positive side, he's worked at a lot of jobs and for a lot of like good head coaches. I mean, the fact that he's worked at Alabama with Nick Saban, he's worked at Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. He's worked in the SEC. He's been hired by head coaches. It seems like he's got a solid resume too, is like working with special teams. He just hasn't been a primary play caller. So there's definitely an element of unknown there, especially with a first-time head coach. Now, the other side of it is they hired Matt Barnes, who was the defensive coordinator at Memphis, and he was also the kind of sort of interim defensive coordinator for Ohio State the previous year. So he's got some experience coming in, and that may help Hutzler kind of transition into that primary role. You do have a guy with experience, and now you're pairing him with a guy who has SEC experience. So I can see why Lebby did it. I probably would have hired a much more seasoned defensive coordinator if I was calling the shots there.
Right. Well, I would also argue, though, Stephen, that whether it's, of course, Kiffin went out and got Pete Golding, but it's not like he had a sterling reputation at Alabama. I mean, many of those fans were happy to see him go. But if you're going to go coach for Kiffin, Heupel, now Lebby, I don't know how, and this is nothing against those guys, but that's probably a tough ask of a defensive coordinator because you're going to be facing so many snaps and your defense can only hold up so much. I mean, if those offenses are working to their highest level, they're scoring around 45 points per game, giving up 35 points per game is probably winning football. Yet at 90% of colleges, they want you fired if you're giving up 35 points per game. So it's a tough ask is my point.
The flip side of that is if you're a defensive coordinator like Hutzler or a Pete Golding, if you're looking to move up the career ladder, like you have sort of autonomy on that side of the ball. You're kind of the head coach of the defense because like Jeff Lebby's probably going to be focused on the offensive room. Same thing for Lane Kiffin. So there is an opportunity here for guys like Hutzler to try to move up by sort of, you have a lot more autonomy, whereas you go to another staff, you might have the head coach meddling it. I'm sure Lebby will have his influence, and the same thing is with Kiffin. But there's some autonomy there that I'm sure like they would appreciate as the defensive coordinator here. So it's a really fascinating hire. I'm curious to see how it works out for Mississippi State just because of the unknown and sort of being a first-time play caller at a role where you're not going to have much time with all the turnover and also sort of the first time that this defense gives up 500 yards to somebody, you know that Starkville will not be very friendly to Mr. Hutzler.
Right. And how about Oklahoma, Stephen? I'm just so overjoyed we get to talk about Texas and Oklahoma now, but they made a coordinator change as well. Not a change because Jeff Lebby, obviously new head coach at Mississippi State, but they promoted analyst Seth Littrell to offensive coordinator. I believe he was former head coach there at North Texas. Thoughts on him because this is a big time, again, kind of the same thing we're talking about, but reverse order. Brent Venables, defensive-minded guy. You really got to nail these offensive coordinator hires if you're going to have a successful program. He knocked it out of the park with Jeff Lebby. Now he's handing the keys to his offense to Seth Littrell. What are your thoughts on this move by the Sooners?
Good move. Seth Littrell, you look at his track record, whether it was at, I think, Arizona, North Carolina, Indiana, always pretty much producing successful offenses. And when he was the head coach at North Texas, offense was not the problem. They just couldn't stop anybody most seasons. So I think it's kind of a seamless transition. He's been working in an off-field role at Oklahoma last year. And so he pretty much knows the players. He knows the scheme they're running. He's been a head coach before. He's not a first-time play caller. I think he's to the discussion that we had on Hutzler and Mississippi State. Venables is all about the defense. Seth Littrell's been an offense. He's been a head coach. He's been a coordinator. I think this is a perfect fit for him. The track record's there. I love it for Oklahoma. I'm excited to see too what he does with Jackson Arnold next year, and we'll get a look at Oklahoma in the bowl game against Arizona and get a first look at Jackson Arnold for next season.
Yeah. Well, one team, Stephen, that I'm ready to hype up for next season already, and we haven't even seen their bowl game, and you already mentioned in this tweet I sent out, but Ole Miss, of course, we got Judkins back, maybe the best running back in all the country next season. Jordan Watkins is committed to return. Trey Harris and tight end Caden Prieskorn and offensive tackle Michael Pettis on Monday, all committed to returning thanks to Ole Miss NIL. Hey, credit NIL. Hey, they're taking care of their players. Jackson Dart has not officially, to my knowledge, said he's coming back, but all indications are he will if Jackson Dart continues to progress to the way that he has in his 2 seasons there in Oxford. I'm calling it, Stephen. I mean, you're the Athlon Sports preseason predictor, so you may not want to reveal anything to this point. I know you got to do a ton of research, but Ole Miss is looking like a preseason top 10 team to me. And with all these guys back and a leaked schedule, Stephen, again, leaked schedule. I don't know if this schedule is legitimate or not. I mean, we know the opponents, but the schedule, according to FBS schedules, I'm going to run down it real quick. Furman at home, MTSU at home, which is a new coach, at Wake Forest, Georgia Southern. I thought we were done with cupcake schedules in the SEC. Apparently not at Ole Miss. Credit them for 4 gimmies here.
Hey, they got to. Hey, in this new era of the 16-team SEC, you might want to schedule 4 gimmies just to make sure you get to a bowl game.
Yeah. I mean, hey, if it works, it works. Kentucky at home, at South Carolina, at LSU. It's going to be tough. You get 2 weeks to prepare for Oklahoma at home, at Arkansas, Georgia at home. Then 2 weeks to prepare for at Florida and Mississippi State at home. That is according to FBS schedules. Don't know if this schedule is official yet. We'll find out on Wednesday. But given all these players returning, Stephen, given the schedule that I just ran down there, I mean, if I'm an Ole Miss fan here, I'm not saying playoff or bust, but I might be saying that in the back of my mind. I wouldn't yell it yet. You know what I mean? We got to see this team.
Well, I think let's also continue the optimism front is what they've been doing in the transfer portal so far. Lane Kiffin, of course, is the portal king, and they've gotten Chris Paul from Arkansas, the linebacker, and Tavion Nicholson, the defensive back transfer from Illinois. They now have, I think, 2 starters from probably day one when they walk into Oxford to start next season, continuing that theme of Pete Golding's got to get this defense better. You got to bring in some more guys on that side of the ball. I would assume they're probably not done here either. But the offense looks to me like it's going to be one of the best in the country once again next season. When you were talking about that schedule, the first thing that came to my mind is there's no Alabama, there's no Texas, and they get Oklahoma and Georgia at home. So that's potentially 4 of the top 10 or 12 teams in the country and 2 at home, and they miss 2. That's pretty favorable if you're Lane Kiffin. So I think Ole Miss won 10 games this year with that schedule and the playmakers, and if Jackson Dart returns at quarterback, don't you have to start the bar at like 10 wins next year? I would think so.
I think so, Stephen, and that's why I'm so excited for the Rebels next season. It could be a special season. Credit them for, making the most at NIL, and credit Kiffin for attaching his name to every job out there so that NIL money keeps flowing in and keeping these elite players in Oxford for another year. And like you said, they're not going to be done yet. They're going to attract more talent, and we all get enamored, Stephen, with heck, we're just as guilty of it. We're going through here, new coaches, new coordinators. But year 2, Pete Golding, like you said, I mean, that could be more impactful than any new hire, second year in the system for all those players. So, again, they'll probably never be a lockdown defense given the pace they go on offense. But if they just can take strides, if they can just limit teams in the red zone, force more turnovers, be more disruptive, more havoc plays, that's the recipe for Ole Miss having a special season.
Absolutely. And I think, to your point, the key things for me for Ole Miss, I'm not worried about the offense. Like, I think with the playmakers, quarterback, Judkins, Kiffin calling plays, that side of the ball set. They were better on defense statistically this year under Pete Golding. They made strides. It wasn't the elite strides, I think, that if you're an Ole Miss fan, you were hoping for, but there was progress. So year 2 of the scheme, and you also bring in some transfers to either start or add depth to what you already had coming back next year. That's a really positive, like, optimism trajectory here for Ole Miss. So it's not about being first in the SEC in scoring defense. It's about havoc plays for me. When you have an offense like Lane Kiffin, you've got to be able to force some turnovers. You got to be able to get to the quarterback. You've got to be able to get off the field on third downs and in the red zone. If you're giving up 3 and you're scoring 7, the math works out really well over a couple quarters there. So Ole Miss will probably never have an elite defense. And while there is some room to grow here for sure, I think if you're an Ole Miss fan, I think you got to start to be a little positive about the overall direction of obviously the team the last couple of years for sure, but what could happen on defense next year to get you into that conversation. Also, a broader conversation that as we're talking here, occurs to me just how brutal. Just to stay, as we're talking, to thinking about how the SEC could be next year if Ole Miss is going to be a top 10 team. Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Oklahoma, Ole Miss, LSU, I'm sure won't be very far behind on Tennessee. I would assume would be a top 10 team. Same thing for A&M. I mean, Mike, I don't know about you, but I mean, this is going to be awesome. I hate conference realignment, but the new SEC is going to be pretty cool.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be some disappointed fans next season because we can't all win. You know
what? Right. Yeah. Good luck trying to project W's and L's next year in the SEC.
Well, before we fast forward completely to next season, Stephen, I wanted to wrap up with this. Thoughts on any, it's award season. Jaden Daniels just got the Heisman. I would assume that we both agree that that was the rightful decision there. But any, I'm going to have you run down your all SEC team here in just a moment. But any players snubbed or anything during award season that you think in the SEC that maybe should have got some more recognition?
I'll start with the Heisman. I think the voters got it right. Jaden Daniels, from a statistical, from an importance, from the most outstanding, whatever criteria that you want to vote on for the Heisman Trophy, he fit it this year. So they got it right. I thought he may win it by a few more votes. Not that it's a big deal, but it was kind of close there. Not sure why somebody voted Michigan quarterback JJ McCarthy first for the Heisman Trophy. I would love to know what the reasoning was behind that one. So maybe Jaden Daniels got snubbed a Heisman vote because somebody voted for JJ McCarthy. I did think one award kind of stood out to me. It was the Nagurski Award. Malachi Starks from Georgia was up for it, and Dallas Turner, I don't believe, was a finalist for it. But I was a little surprised that Xavier Watts from Notre Dame won it. His seems like it's more turnover driven. He had a lot of big plays, and it felt like just the other guys were just better players. Maybe they just weren't as fortunate in the turnover department. So I did think Turner and Starks probably, in my mind, they probably deserve the Nagurski Award more than Xavier Watts did at Notre Dame.
Yeah. No, I would agree with you on that one. So I asked you to come prepared with an all-SEC team. And as Stephen, I'm sure will tell you, he's got plenty of guys that, honorable mention, because we're trying not to get the entire SEC mad at us with Stephen's list here. But who you got on your all-SEC team, Stephen?
Well, we'll start with quarterback. I mean, I think we all know the obvious answer with that one. It's Jaden Daniels of LSU.
Joe Milton.
No,
I'm sorry.
I was going to say somebody had him 24th in their quarterback rankings this year. Looked pretty good. So Jaden Daniels was an easy pick for me at number one. There's a few positions as you go through here, and they're just easy. Put them in pen. Daniels was one of them. I'll continue here in the offense, and Mike, feel free to stop me on this. But at running back, I've got Cody Schrader and Ray Davis. Judkins and Jalen Wright were just behind those two.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, you have to put Cody Schrader up there, but you could almost put Jaden Daniels as one of the top running backs. He was just so effective this season for LSU. I wouldn't have any objection to those. Ray Davis certainly scored a ton of touchdowns for Kentucky, and we got to see his full potential there after transferring in from Vanderbilt. I would have liked to seen, I think it's fair to say, and maybe it's not on him, but, there was he was kind of upset with how he was used a little bit towards the tail end of the season, but just a touchdown machine. There's no chance they would have beaten Louisville without Ray Davis. And I love the fact that he has announced, hey, I'm playing for the bowl. He doesn't have to play in a bowl game. In today's modern era, these guys just off to the NFL, and he will be an NFL player. But I love the fact that he's playing in the bowl game. It means something to him. Also
a great NFL showcase for him, because Clemson's defensive front is the strength of that team. So if he has a good game, I think it can only help his draft stock. It was tough in my mind. Like Judkins, maybe I weighed too much in the early part of the season because Judkins got off to a slow start and he got a lot better over the course of the season. Davis kind of started hot, kind of like you said, kind of had his moments later in the year, maybe where he wasn't as involved as much. So based upon talent, I think I'd rather have Quinshad Judkins, maybe just rated Ray Davis just a little bit better, having a better season. You look at the numbers within SEC play, and they're super close too. So I could go either way on this one.
Yeah, and I think you could certainly, if you're a Tennessee fan, argue that Jalen Wright played as well as any of those guys as well. But because they essentially split up the carries between three backs, and they were all so effective, which I think helped them. Not putting a ton of miles on those guys, so to speak. That I'm sure that helped, but. It would have been interesting to see Jalen Wright if he was just like which he was RB1, but if he got a ton of carries, the production he could have put up in this offense. But I would imagine that he's happy with the number of carries he got, because now he can go to the NFL a lot fresher, so to speak.
And I think you could also maybe make that argument for Edwards and Milton at Georgia. Those two came on once they were healthy, and once there was some cohesion on the Georgia offensive line, they got better as the season went on, but they also split up carries. Woody Marks too, had he stayed healthy, I think there was probably a good chance that maybe we're talking about him for all SEC honors too at the end of the season.
Yeah, a lot of good running backs in the SEC this year, no doubt.
At receiver, I sort of cheated a little bit. I had an all-purpose spot, and 3 receiver spots. So at all purpose, I think you could probably guess it's Luther Burden. Whether it's kickoff returns, getting him the ball on punts, handoffs, catches, one of the best all around players in the nation. At receiver, I went with Malik Neighbors, Xavier Legette, and Brian Thomas. I think that's a pretty strong group of receivers in the SEC. Kind of, Trey Harris from Ole Miss, also very deserving. I also think you could throw Anais Smith in there for all-purpose position as well.
Yeah, and I apologize. I may have missed it. Did you say Legette too? Would you throw him in there?
Yeah, the 2 LSU guys and Legette at the receiver spots, and cheating to get Luther Burden on there as first teamer with the all-purpose spot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't think that Jermaine Burton is better than those guys, at least not this year. But he stepped up in some big-time situations. I'm thinking SEC championship, the Texas A&M game. I mean, he was dominant in that. That was a season-defining game for Alabama, so he should get some love, certainly. Ricky Pershaw was an outstanding receiver for Florida as well. But I don't have any complaints with any of those guys you got on there.
Yeah, Burton led the SEC at 22 yards a catch, which is pretty dang good. He was certainly in consideration for one of the probably second or third team spots that I'll fill out. But that was, Legette, Thomas, and Neighbors, man. Those are, I don't know, I'm sure probably going to be 3 of everybody's All-Americans at receiver this year. It's a really good year, top heavy for the SEC and receivers.
And another one maybe Ladd McConkey, but he got banged up. Had he been healthy throughout the season, he may have put up some better numbers to where he could make a case for himself. Would you agree with that?
Agree. I would also throw like Will Shepherd in there. It's almost like it's sort of he made the most of the opportunities that he had, and I think if he had a few more, he probably would have put up better numbers this season. But so there's certainly some depth here. You mentioned Pearsall, I think would be a strong like second team candidate this year. But like I said, I think pretty top heavy, and you throw Trey Harris in there, who was 6th in the SEC in receiving yards per game. That's a really solid group of receivers in the mix for first team All SEC.
Yeah, I'm glad you referenced Trey Harris or Trey Wilson, excuse me, because do you think he's like the heir apparent to Luther Burden for that all-purpose type?
Yeah, I do. Actually, I'm glad you brought him up because every time I've watched Florida this year, I'm kind of like, why is he not getting the ball more? Like, he seems like he should probably be more involved here. He seems to be pretty he's gotten, I think, certainly more comfortable, and I think they've tried to utilize him more as the season goes along as a freshman, bringing him along. But he looks like to me like somebody who could be like one of Florida's top playmakers next year, but a guy that might be a breakout candidate in the SEC. If you didn't watch him this year, I think next year, if you want to get ahead of the curve, I think next year he could be a breakout star in the SEC for sure.
Now it's probably the least surprising. Who you got at tight end?
Yeah, not a whole lot of time to think about this one. It's Brock Bowers at Georgia. Easy pick for me. Second team debate. Still kind of wrestling with this one. Prieskorn over at Ole Miss. Fairweather from Auburn, and Trey Knox for South Carolina. I think those would all be second team candidates, but Brock Bowers is by far the easiest selection at first team.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he missed significant portion. I still think he led Georgia in many key categories.
Yeah, absolutely. I think 70-something receiving yards a game and 6 touchdowns. And despite the injuries and the superhuman return time and getting banged up late in the season, those numbers are really good for a guy who played in 10 games and was also returning from a pretty significant injury this year.
Mm-hmm.
Best tight end in the country too, by the way. It's
Do you have selections for offensive line?
Yeah, I do. These are, man, you can look at metrics from different sites and pass blocking and run blocking. They give you some different names. So I tried to blend a little bit here with just the eye test. I've got Cedric Van Pran from Georgia as the starting center. I think he'll be All-American by most people at that position. I went 5 linemen outside of center just to kind of get a different name on there. I've got 2 guys from Alabama, J.C. Latham, Tyler Booker, Tate Ratledge, from Georgia, Will Campbell from LSU, and Javon Foster from Missouri. Those would be my starting like 5 outside of center. I know I'm bending the rules a little bit, but I thought all those guys were pretty deserving this year.
Yeah, you'd win a lot of games with that unit as your offensive line. You know what?
12 men we're trying to play in the CFL. So,
all right. How about on defense, Steven?
yeah, I thought the defensive line, maybe not as many big names as we're used to seeing in the past, but certainly I think a lot of production here. And it starts with James Pierce, kind of the leader of a very active Tennessee defensive line. Darius Robinson of Missouri, Deion Walker from Kentucky, and Landon Jackson from Arkansas. Since I went 5 offensive linemen, I had to go 5 DL. I went with Marcus Harris, too, of Auburn, also near the top of the SEC in tackles for loss.
Now, this may not be fair to Kentucky, Stephen, but do you think if Kentucky was a little bit better, that Deion Walker could have gotten some recognition as SEC Defensive Player of the Year? Because he just seemed to be a game wrecker for nearly every game I watched of Kentucky.
That's a really good question. I think certainly as far as national recognition, as far as like the postseason All-America teams that we'll see, I think maybe the best way to put it is maybe one of the more underrated stars in the country. You mentioned the havoc. I mean, I think like 10.5 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks. I mean, he was pretty much a constant disruptive force and stopping the run. You know, we know Kentucky's defensive issues this year against the pass. Well, he was pretty active up front. So I would go with probably would be way more nationally recognized if maybe Kentucky won a few more games this year. That's fair.
Right. Yeah. I think that's kind of what was maybe holding that back, which is, again, it's not on him to win all these games, but it's just kind of the way some of these national recognition goes. You know what?
Absolutely. Yeah. Some of the voting on some of these things are we saw the Heisman vote. You see how extensive it is, and you see some of the votes, and it makes you wonder a little bit. So yeah, I think football guys, like the guys who like Cole Kublik, who obviously does a ton of tape studying, is awesome. He would be perfect to talk a lot about like the impact of guys like Walker and some of the underrated superstars of the SEC, and maybe aren't getting enough like Heisman or All Conference or All America recognition.
Mm-hmm. How about at linebacker? Who made your team there?
I thought this trio was actually pretty easy. Dallas Turner, I think for sure he needs to be on there. Edgerrin Cooper at Texas A&M and Nathaniel Watson, Mississippi State. Went kind of back and forth between Watson and Jet Johnson, but kind of just thought Watson was a little bit more impactful to that defense. So I felt Turner, Cooper, and Watson should be the 3 linebackers on the All-SEC team.
They just don't play defense in the East, do they, Stephen?
all from the West. Hey, even if you look at like the second team, like as I was going through, is kind of making like guys who were also in the mix. Like Harold Perkins at LSU kind of cranked it up a little bit as the season went on. Jet Johnson, Chris Braswell. Oddly enough, not somebody from Georgia, really. I think Dumas Johnson getting hurt probably hurts his candidacy for all conference, whether that's fair or not. But there's a lot of very very West heavy year for linebackers here.
Again, it's one game, and it's something that Georgia fans they're going to lose sleep over all off season. But would you attribute that at all, them losing the SEC championship to maybe not having some of these defensive stars that we're accustomed to being there in Athens?
I think it would have helped, especially like when you think about how that game played out and you think about the times that they were, obviously they were using the 2 spies on Milroe, but you think about if you had a healthy like Dumas Johnson and how he could have maybe either impacted the run, just having a guy that's very good at communication out there in your defense, I think it would have helped. Does it change the outcome? I don't feel like it's a slam dunk that they would have beaten Alabama with him. He certainly would have helped. Also, I should mention Debo Williams of South Carolina probably deserves to be in the consideration to fantastic season, 113 tackles for South Carolina.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, Georgia, to their credit, they do have some outstanding defensive backs, and I imagine at least one of them made your list there.
Yeah, it's funny because I wrote down 4 Georgia defensive backs to be in consideration for all conference honors, and there's almost not enough spots, so I may have to cheat and like add an extra corner or safety to get these guys all properly recognized. But a corner, I think pretty easy. Kool-Aid McKinstry and Chris Abrams-Drain, two players who had outstanding seasons, make the first team. At safety, I've got Malachi Starks and Caleb Downs, 2 young up-and-coming safeties who are going to be right at the top of the best defensive players already, but even more so next season. And to kind of throw out there, Tyke Smith, Javon Bullard, Kamari Lassiter, all those guys from Georgia deserve recognition too.
Yeah, we can play 7 defensive backs. That's just the way it is now. You know what?
Hey, I bent the rules to put 12 on the 5 offensive linemen and an extra center. So
Auburn does it. They may not do it effectively, but they've played 8 defensive backs. I've seen them do it.
Yeah, well, I think they needed 12 out there. The 4th and 30.
All right. Did you have? Did any kicker or punter make your? They're people too, Stephen.
Absolutely. Will Reichard as my kicker. Matt Hayball from Vanderbilt as the punter. Barry and Brown at kick returner, and Anaya Smith at punt returner.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. I mean, I would imagine the vast majority of the names you just ran down, Stephen, not only do they all deserve the recognition, but they're all probably going to have bright futures at the next level.
Absolutely. We can't forget about our guy, the thicker kicker, right? Like he's got to be on the second team award, and especially the timeliness of his kicks, beating Kansas State, the kick to beat Florida under pressure. It was pretty impressive by Harrison Mevis this year. As we're talking, and this is a problem that we'll encounter this offseason, but think about adding Oklahoma and Texas to this league and trying to come up with a first or second team all conference. And it's almost like basically like your first and second team all American squads. Like for the most part, I mean, this is going to be really hard to trim this down in the offseason. I just for example, Jaden Daniels, Carson Beck, and Jalen Milroe are my top 3 quarterbacks. And I mean, that's 3 of the better ones in college football this year. This is going to be a crazy deep year. If you add, think about if you had Oklahoma and Texas this year with Quinn Ewers and Dylan Gabriel.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there was a game, I believe Gabriel scored 8 touchdowns, if I'm not mistaken, in a single ball game. We've seen Ewers kind of take over games, and he may do it in the college football playoff here in the weeks to come. So, man, it's an embarrassment of riches and talent, and I cannot wait for it, Steve. I'll promise you that.
Absolutely. I can't wait for the schedule, too, on Wednesday night, just to see all the matchups. We know who the teams are playing, but I'm always interested in the order of games, interested in see where the bye weeks fall, who's gets how does the road game stack up after home games? Where's the letdown? All those. So it's a whole new world in the SEC, but man, to see the Texas and Oklahoma on the slate next year and to see it official, it's going to be pretty cool. So I'm as sad as it is, we're hitting the off season here. There's a lot to look forward to in some respects for next year.
Yeah. And again, credit the SEC. I've been calling for it for a long time, Stephen. Make this the schedulings. They did the first one in July, the opponent reveal, make that an event. Now we're doing the schedule release in December, making that an event. They're maximizing engagement, which is great for people like you and I. They're finally doing this right.
I had this idea. If you've watched the NBA draft lottery and how awkward it is with everybody sitting in the room waiting until their team is called up. I've always had this idea we could have Feinbaum host, and all the SEC coaches are sitting there nervously sweating to see who their opponents are going to be. If we just did the schedule, you have to pick 8 opponents every year. It's totally different. It could be some great television. To see the look on Jeff Lebby's face as he gets to play, Alabama, LSU, Georgia back-to-backers updates.
Yeah, hey, maybe that's coming. At the new SEC.
Hey, like you said, programming, content, and keeping the buzz going all off season. I think it's got potential.
No doubt.
See if we can get Feinbaum to do it for us next year.
All right, Stephen. Hey, before you go, as always, can you tell the audience where can they find you and where can they find your work?
Absolutely. So you can check us out on the Cover 2 podcast every Wednesday, talking everything college football, whether that's SEC, Big Ten, all things college football. Cover 2 podcast every Wednesday. You can follow me on Twitter at Athlon Steven, and you can check out my work on YouTube at AllCFB365. Also, Stephen L. CFB if you're on TikTok or Instagram. So had to throw one more in there.
Well, I appreciate you, my friend. Can't wait for our chat next week. And enjoy it's not quite the off season, but it kind of feels like it. Enjoy the half season here, I guess I should say.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, you too. And look forward to checking out the schedule release this week and seeing what the transfer portal has in store for us. I'm sure there'll be no shortage of stuff for us to talk about next time.
All right, Steve.